Hello, I'm Mary Kubica. I'm the author of When the Lights Go Out, and you're watching Author's Voice.
I know everybody knows who you are, but for the one or two people who do not know who you are, I'm going to just read a very short snippet of a bio and then we'll go into our talk. Mary Kubica is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of The Good Girl, you remember that, I think everyone in the world read that, and Pretty Baby, Don't You Cry, and Every Last Lie. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, in History and American Literature. She lives outside of Chicago with her husband and 2 children and enjoys photography, gardening, and caring for the animals at a local shelter. The Good Girl was an Indie Next Pick in August of 2014, received a Strand Critics nomination for Best First Novel, and was a nominee in the Goodreads Choice Awards in Debut Author and Mystery. In Debut Goodreads Author and Mystery. Mary's novels have been translated into over 20 languages and have sold over 1 million copies worldwide. She's been described as a writer of vice-like control, I like that, and her novels have been praised as hypnotic and thrilling and illuminating. So there you go. So in this book, you chose to deal with the subject of insomnia.
Yes.
And I was wondering why? Why?
Sure, yeah. Well, it wasn't one of the first things that came to me about this book. I had some other elements of the story figured out first. And I think I always like to push my characters to the limits and, just make their struggle a little bit more difficult for them and really just see what they're capable of, or when they're put in these really tough situations, what might happen to them. And so I had some elements of the story worked out, and I was starting to write it, and then it just so happens that I was in San Francisco for an event, and I had to fly home. I had to take the red-eye home to one of my children had something going on the next day that I needed to be there for. And I thought, well, no problem. I'll sleep on the plane. I'll feel rested enough the following morning. Well, as luck would have it, I couldn't sleep at all on that plane ride. I didn't catch a wink of sleep. Got home completely exhausted, somehow got myself from the airport home, and I'm unpacking my bag when I take my shoes out of my suitcase, walk them downstairs, and put them away in the dishwasher. And so I thought to myself, that's one night without sleep. And I started thinking, well, what would happen if my character didn't sleep for 2 or 3 or 4 nights? How would this just really complicate this sort of search for self-discovery she's going through? And so I thought I'd add that element to her story and see what happens.
So did you have to do research on what happens to a person with insomnia?
I did. I learned quite a bit about insomnia, and I think insomnia is a great topic because it's something that on some level we can all relate to. As soon as I sort of announced what this book was about, readers seemed really enthusiastic about that element. They've suffered that occasional sleepless night. And we know how that one night without sleep feels. You're awake all night, you're thinking just these ridiculous, horrendous thoughts in the middle of the night. The night goes on forever. And then the next day you're completely exhausted, emotionally, physically. And so, yes, I did have to research. Well, beyond that one night, what happens if this character doesn't sleep 2 or 3 or 4? Obviously, these symptoms are just going to get worse and worse over time. So I did do quite a bit of research into that to see, what Jessie was maybe going to experience over those days without sleep.
Did you know that it was going to cut back and forth between Jessie and
Eden?
Eden, right.
I did. I knew that it was going to cut back and forth between Jessie and somebody. I love writing all of my books with multiple narrators.
Why is that?
I think that I think it gives a reader sort of a more comprehensive view of what's going on. They can see the story unfold from multiple narrators, sometimes from different points in time, which is the case with this story also. And so I think it gives them a more comprehensive view, but I think that it also opens it up to question. The reader has to wonder, can I trust both of these narrators? Is one of these or both of these narrators a bit unreliable? Which I think you can argue they both are to to some point, yeah.
Yeah, that was very sly of you. I picked that up because they're, you know, in the day of unreliable narrators, you didn't just do one, you doubled it. And I thought it was, when that critic said vice-like control, that was really well done.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, it shows a real, I mean, the whole book shows a whole mastery of the craft of suspense.
Oh, I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
really do.
No, I love a lot of what you're saying I can relate to, because I love multiple points of view, and of course my first series was first person, so I had to start a new series so I could go into third.
Right.
Okay, so Jessie is very much alone and isolated from the world in the story. Did you see that as an obstacle or an advantage?
I think it can work both ways, in all honesty. I think that all of my characters, really across all of my books, they're loners. They really are, you know, every single one of them when I start to think about it. And I think that that's sort of a position I naturally put many of my characters in. And I think maybe as a writer it helps me connect more with them because they don't have this great big support system.
Right.
And so I think I get to know them a little bit more thoroughly and can hopefully bring them across better on the page.
Yeah.
So in that respect, it was maybe an advantage. But on the other hand, you know, Jessie's moving through her chapters alone. You know, she does meet a friend along the way, and
Yes.
and there's a lot of memories of her time with her mother, and so I could build on that. But on the other hand, I had to build much of her character using just her. So that was a challenge at times.
Mm-hmm. Well, the whole sections of the book, and I'm not giving away any spoilers, where she is living in the back of the house of the other lady,
Yes.
and you know, she's hearing things in the night and she's seeing things. I mean, that was just, it was scary. It was a little scary.
I'm glad to hear, because that was what I was aiming for. I think that I want readers to definitely be off guard by her storyline, a little nervous and suspenseful, and I also want readers to empathize with Jessie. I think Jessie's going through quite a bit. She's just lost her mother when the novel begins, and so she's going through grief. She's on her own. She's suffering from this insomnia, and now, you know, she comes to wonder if she's the person she thinks she is. So she's got all these things to tackle at once.
Yeah, it really. So you're known for throwing in a huge twist in your stories that casts a completely different filter on what's gone before. Do you always know the twist when you start, or is that something that kind of rises organically because it just couldn't be anything else?
So this is my 5th book, and this is the first time that I knew the twist first. So I actually, with this book, of course I won't say what that twist is.
No, of course not.
I thought of the twist first, you know, and I write psychological suspense. I like to get into the minds of my characters, and so I had this idea, and I thought, you know, I want to do that. You know, I want to explore this and see how I can, you know, create a story with this as the twist. And so I actually had that part of it figured out first. And then I went back and I created Jessie and I created Eden. So it was sort of like molding a story into place around this ending that I had in mind.
Were you always sure that you had chosen the right twist, or did you say, well, maybe, you know, was it hard going, I guess, to get?
It was different than my previous novels, just because with the others, I had a starting point. You know, usually some mystery, a woman's been abducted, or, you know, something has happened that I could build from, where this was the opposite. You know, I was building up to something. And so I think there were many more questions for me as the plot throughout to get ultimately to that, you know, final reveal. And that was where some of the, I guess, the struggles in writing, you know, each novel has its own struggles, but for this book, that's where some of the difficulties lied. It was just different than any of the books I'd previously written.
Did it happen quickly? I mean, did you kind of go linearly through the book, or did you do, I guess I'm getting into your process a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you write from chapter 1 to chapter 25, or do you skip around?
So with all my books, with the multiple narrators, I do one narrator at a time.
Oh,
so
really?
with this book, I started with Eden, and I don't know why. I think that of the two characters, I think I probably have more in common with Eden.
Right.
She's wanting to be a mother, I'm a mother. I think that I could understand many of the things she was going through. So I started with her, and I wrote her story in its entirety. And then went back to the beginning and wrote all of Jessie. So, and I've done that with every single book that I've written. It helps me when I'm writing that character to get inside their head. It sounds like it would be complicated, I think, when I usually say that, but I feel like I'm taking the easy way out when I write this way. Just, you know, I can get in that character's head. I'm only dealing with one plot instead of jumping back and forth between two plots. And I feel like I can keep the character's voice really sharp. You know, Eden doesn't end up sounding like Jessie and vice versa. They're both pretty distinct characters.
That's interesting. I can't do it that way, so I admire you for doing that. I'm always conscious when you're switching voices that there's a reason for it, and there's something in the chapter from voice 1 that should relate a little bit to the voice 2 in that segment. And I didn't get the feeling that, I did get the feeling there was a relationship between the segments. So
I'm glad. And it requires some editing. You know, sometimes when I put all the chapters back together, something is revealed at the wrong point, or I usually make an effort at the beginning of each chapter just to kind of drop some brief reminders as to where, you know, Eden's storyline left off in the last chapter, since we've been away from her for 10 or 12 pages.
But even the themes of the chapters, in some way, it's not that they're similar, but they mesh with each other. They don't conflict. You know,
Thank you for saying that.
No, it's true. You are also known for, well, I'd call it quiet suspense. You know, there's not a lot of fires or gunshots or things like that. You know, the events of the story, and without the insomnia and the landlord and her mom's death, did they rise organically from the story, or were they all planned? I think you kind of addressed it before, but
I'm not really a planner.
Yeah.
So they tend to rise organically. There are some elements that, you know, when I have that idea, I first of all do have to submit a proposal to my editor. So I think that makes me sort of put my thinking cap on and think through some of the major plot issues for the book and just sort of organize it that way. But the smaller details just happen spontaneously. You know, I'll be writing a chapter and some detail about Jessie or her life is revealed, and it sort of casts a different light on Jessie as a character, and then stays with her and of course with me throughout the writing process. So the book and the characters are altered that way, and it goes from chapter to chapter. And I say all the time, you know, that my characters surprise me, and they do. You know, I have no idea that such and such is going to happen until I get to that point in the writing process, and then it just changes everything.
Yeah,
and I love it.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I always think they come from your subconscious.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think
that those surprises. It's like, oh, it was there all along. I just didn't bring it into consciousness.
Exactly. I completely agree, and I'll be completely honest. Every now and then, I'll even dream about like some answer. You know, I'm like worrying, trying to write a scene, and it's not happening, and that night maybe I'll dream about something that helps me finish writing that scene, and that's, I agree, it's, you know, that subconscious, that unconscious mind helping work out some of those details.
That's great. I can't remember my dreams. I wish I could. So, when did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I was probably 8 years old, and I had always loved to read for as long as I could remember, but I hadn't thought a whole lot about, you know, the author sitting at home writing these books I loved. It was sort of as if they just started, you know, at the bookstore, the library, when I went to get my hands on them. And then I was at a sleepover at my grandparents' house, and a cousin of mine was there, and she shared with me a story she had written. And I was just blown away by this idea that people write books, you know, that they had a whole life before the bookstore and the library. And so I knew that was something I wanted to do, and really from that moment, I never stopped writing.
Really? You started really young.
I did.
Did you have a family that encouraged you to read all the time?
I have a family that encouraged me to do anything I really wanted to do. So I've always had a very supportive and encouraging family, and reading was very important in our family, and we had a lot of books. I loved reading, so it was just one of those things that always stuck with me.
Yeah. So when did you decide to focus on suspense, and psychological suspense, as opposed to, let's say, a more literary type of?
Right. I usually say that it found me versus the other way around. When I started writing, you know, early on, it was just journalish type stuff, you know, when I was a girl and into high school and college. I felt, you know, as a fictional characters that were a lot like me, but a little bit more adventurous, and, you know, so I could live vicariously through these pages. And then somewhere into my 20s, I wrote nothing published, but more general women's fiction, I would say. And it wasn't until I started writing my debut novel, The Good Girl, that those twisty elements worked their way in, and it was not intentional. When I started that book, I thought I was writing a love story, period.
Yeah.
And, you know, then as we were just saying before, you know, my characters did something to surprise me, or, you know, there was some mystery developing, and this book just organically took a total twist from me. But I loved every minute of it, and that was the first manuscript that I ever finished. And I felt then, you know, that the twists and turns, that suspenseful element was what had been missing in everything I had tried writing before that time.
No kidding. So the first book you wrote was the first one that got published?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow, but you've been writing all those years.
I had, and I will say, getting it published was not easy. So it sounds like it was easy, but it was a many year struggle.
No, I know it sounds Cinderella, but it really wasn't. So when you, all the women, at least Jessie and Eden, can be seen as flawed women, that we don't really recognize who they are at the end. And the unreliable narrator theme has been explosive, really, ever since you and Gillian Flynn came on the scene. Do you ever want to write something different that's not that, for, you know, just for variety?
Yeah, it's obviously where my comfort is, and I think that it's very intriguing to readers. But with every new book that I write, I always, you know, have the goal in mind of, you know, let's put a spin on this. Let's do, you know, something that I've never done before. So I feel like I start every project with that in mind, and whether it's, you know, something about the plot or the characters or the setting or whatever, you know, there's something that I want to do different. So I can see, you know, that you know, characters like Eden and Jessie definitely evolving into something else in future novels.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You sound like my sister. You're saying so many of the things that I would say myself.
Right.
You majored in history and also literature.
Yes.
Was there one professor or one teacher that you will never forget because they did or inspired you or taught you something?
Well, there was a history teacher, Andrew Caton, at Miami University, who has unfortunately since passed away, and he was just the most wonderful professor that I've ever had. I was actually a high school history teacher before I turned to writing full-time, so he inspired me in many ways. But I think that the connection between history and literature is a close one. You know, history, it's stories too. They just happen to be real stories. And, you know, I think that that's why I fell so much in love with history. Was not that I, you know, wanted to know all the Civil War battles, the names and the dates and all this, but I wanted to know the stories of the people who had gone before us. And so I think that that's what drew me there, and Dr. Caton was definitely an inspiration.
Guess what I majored in college?
History?
History.
I love it.
Yeah, I totally agree about the connection between history and fiction.
Yes.
I mean, it's very, very close.
Yes.
Did you specialize in American history when you were teaching in high school?
You know, when I was teaching, I was able to teach, I taught American history, and they also taught U.S. history, and I also taught a wonderful course. It was an elective, which was fun because the kids were really choosing to be there, but it was in ancient and medieval history, which I really enjoyed.
Really? Oh, the gargoyles.
Yes.
And, you know, and the gold paintings and the Madonnas.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And the manners.
Oh, my favorite.
Yeah. I was just, okay, wait, this is about you. I was going to talk. Okay. All right, so some of the events in Jessie's Insomnia were so detailed, like when she found a photo of Aaron. Even after I finished, I wasn't sure if that was true or not. Did you want me to feel that way? Do you want your readers?
I think because of Jessie's insomnia, you know, and she's confused as time goes on. She begins to hallucinate, and you know, as the days go on, I think there becomes a point, and again, this gets back to her as an unreliable narrator, that we don't know. Is this happening? How Jesse is telling us it's happening or not? And you know, which details are accurate here, which is she imagining? So I did, and I think that that adds to hopefully her intrigue as a character, but just the suspense in the story as well.
Oh, it definitely did. Okay, another question about craft, and I'm curious how you approach this. There are, you know, certain scenes that you know are really important chapters or scenes, and then there are other chapters that are leading up to them that are kind of your everyday workaday chapters that you have to do to get to where you the fun part.
Right.
Do you feel that it's more difficult to write those, or do you try to challenge yourself to put something special in those, let's just call them workaday chapters, because I'm not very articulate.
That middle of the book is the hardest, and I think that for many authors would probably say the same thing. You know, the beginning is great. You're introducing your characters and whatever issue is going on. The ending is fantastic because you get to pull it all together. But the middle is like, yeah, things are happening, but it's the middle. So that can definitely be more complex. I think that the best advice that I ever got was from my wonderful editor, Erica Mrani, about writing this kind of novel, was that every single chapter should end on some sort of cliffhanger, no matter what. And it doesn't have to be, you know, mind-shattering cliffhanger, but enough that the reader, you're going to thrust that reader into the next chapter because they want to figure that out. Right. And so that's one of those things that always sticks with me, to just never end a chapter on some, you know, mundane thing that the reader puts the bookmark in and sets that book aside. You want them to keep going. So that helps in some small way to just keep the questions going throughout that middle of the book.
So have you branched out to do short stories or novellas at all?
So I've tried. And I've struggled, to be entirely honest. I think that novel writing is more my cup of tea, just because I love my characters and I love developing really, you know, just really well-developed characters, hopefully. That's always my goal. I want them to seem really three-dimensional, and I think it takes time for me to adequately do that. And that's one area that I struggle. But I have heard, for a suspense writer who wants to keep, you know, that plot moving, that it's a wonderful practice. Just because here you have, you know, only a few thousand words to get this whole story in, so you've got to be quick.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep working at that. One day I'll get a short story.
See, I wonder sometimes, I do write short stories, if I'm too quick in my novel writing. Maybe I should slow down a little bit and sort of milk the characters more or something like that. I never know quite where the right balance is.
Right. And I think for writers, it's a skill, both novel writing, short stories, all those skills we're constantly learning. You know, I always say that I hope my 20th book is better than my first book, you know, that I just hopefully keep developing those skills with each novel.
Which, I know this is like saying which of your children do you love best, but which was, let's put it this way, which was the easiest novel for you to write and which was the hardest?
That's a good question. I will say that my third novel, Don't You Cry, was the hardest for me to write, because between my second and my third books, I had actually written an entire novel that my editor and I decided just wasn't up to par, and we decided to set it aside, as I know many authors have done. But I think that it was not good for the self-esteem, you know, and there was a period of, can I do this again, you know, or were those first two books just flukes? You know, so that was hard. I kind of had to get my confidence back before I could write that book. And so that one was more difficult to write for that reason. The easiest, I would say my second novel, Pretty Baby, and I don't have a good reason for it because it was my second novel, and I think that there should have been all sorts of, I think a lot of authors do struggle with their second novel for various reasons, but it was a book that just sort of came. And for me, it was such a wonderful affirmation that I could write books, you know, that first one wasn't just luck, but that I could do this. So I love that about it.
And within the craft of writing, what do you prefer to do, and what do you find more challenging between dialogue or action or narrative?
I struggle with dialogue. I feel like that's one of my Achilles heel. And I practice saying my dialogue out loud just to make sure that it sounds, you know, the way we speak, that it isn't unnecessarily forced, but it sounds natural. So that is one part that I know I struggle on. I would say the part that I love is just the narrative. I love to, really create a scene or, development characters through that narrative and just bring those parts of the story to life.
That's probably why they call you a literary writer who writes suspense as opposed to a suspense author.
I think so.
which is great. So who do you read? Who do you like to read?
Suspense, no surprises. It's definitely my go-to. I love Heather Gudenkloth, Jilly McMillan, Megan Abbott. Those are some of my favorites. I'm also a big historical fiction fan, which probably doesn't come as a surprise with my background in history, but Pam Jenoff is one of my favorites, Julian Cantor.
Do you ever see yourself writing an historical fiction?
I have thought about it, actually. It's on the bucket list. The amount of research that I know these authors put into those books, it makes me nervous. So it's one of those things that I want to do, but not quite yet.
Oh, but if you're a history major, you'll love the research.
I think I would.
I love it. In fact, when I do write historicals as well as contemporary.
Yes.
And there was a time when the whole arc of the story came to me because of research that I did. So it's just, I think
I'm going to have to try it.
One day. Anyway, I think that we are coming to the end of our time with Mary Kubica, and I hope that you will want to order her new book, When the Lights Go Out. I think it's a fabulous book, and I really enjoyed reading it. In fact, I couldn't even put it down once I started. So do that, and we will get a signed copy out to you. I do want to remind you that the book isn't quite out yet. It will be out next week, September 4th, and Mary might be in your neighborhood, so check it out so you can have more. You can talk to her in person because she has a big travel schedule ahead of her. What else? I want to tell you what's coming up on Author's Voice today. In about an hour, as a matter of fact, Sonali Deb is going to welcome Brenda Novak, noted romance author, to Lit with Love to discuss her latest Face-Off. And on Berta's book, author Rebecca Mackay will join Roberta Rubin on September 12th at 3 p.m. to discuss The Great Believers, one of the year's most beloved books. Please join us for both of those events. Have a question? Want a signed copy? Just go to authorsvoice.net and we will answer all your questions. And if you happen to be watching this on YouTube after the broadcast, you can still order signed books. Just use the link underneath the title. Thank you for watching, and thank you so much, Mary, for being with us. And thank you again to Park Row. Reminder, the book is $26.99. And this is Solved, and I'm Libby Hellman. Thank you for watching.